I did not see it coming. Not the humiliation, not the speed, but the fact that I had walked into that chamber completely unprepared for what was waiting. The session had been scheduled as a routine budget review. I had brought my notes and was prepared to discuss infrastructure allocation figures for the third quarter. Then the documents hit the podium. "I need you to explain these transactions," said Deputy Chair Marcus Holt. His voice was level and precise, the voice of someone delivering a rehearsed line. I looked down. My name was on the cover page. My signature appeared on 3 attached sheets. Running through page after page, amounts had been circled in red, large amounts, transfers I had never authorized, accounts I had never opened. The chamber turned on me before I could draw a breath. Not slowly, instantly, as if a signal had been given that I had missed. The faces around me changed all at once. I stood there with those documents in my hands and understood, with a cold and specific clarity, that whatever was happening had been prepared long before that moment. This was not a discovery. This was a delivery. Within 3 minutes, reporters were already in the corridor outside. I could see them through the glass panels in the upper doors, cameras raised, recording, pointed at the entrance as if they had been told exactly when to arrive. Security personnel moved closer from both sides of the room. Not aggressively, just near enough that their positioning communicated something without words. The whispers inside the chamber grew into something more open. People who had greeted me that morning with normal professional courtesy were now leaning toward each other, speaking in the flat tones of people who have already concluded something. I turned to my immediate left, colleagues I had worked alongside for 5 years, people who had built policy frameworks with me. Their eyes moved away from mine. Not one spoke. Then I looked for Chief Raymond Calloway. He was seated 4 places to my right, at the senior officials section. He wore the composed expression of a man witnessing something unfortunate but expected. He did not stand. He did not raise a hand to speak. He did not turn toward me. The man who had mentored me for 11 years said nothing in my defense. Not one word. My name is Walker Christopher, and who I was before this happened shapes everything about what came next. I did not come from a political family. I did not enter government through inherited connections or party loyalty. I came through policy work, years of it, slow and detailed, the kind that exists mostly in rooms without windows and produces documents that shape how government money moves. I had a background in public finance. I worked for 9 years in the budget analysis division of the National Treasury before moving into a senior advisory role. My career was built on one skill: understanding where money was supposed to go and recognizing precisely when it had gone somewhere else. That skill had made me useful to many people. It had also made me, at some point I had not identified, inconvenient to some of those same people. I had no political allies in the traditional sense. No constituency, no bloc, no base. What I had was a record, clean, documented, built across years of unglamorous, consequential work. That was who I was when they set me up. And it was, I came to understand, precisely why they had chosen me. My credibility was the weapon they had borrowed without asking. They had used my own clean name against me. The suspension came the following morning, delivered through a press statement I read on my phone while standing in my kitchen. No phone call beforehand. No meeting. No preliminary conversation of any kind. Just a formal statement issued to every major media outlet at 7:43 in the morning, informing the public that I had been suspended pending an investigation into serious allegations of financial misconduct. The phrase had been chosen carefully, specific enough to convey gravity, vague enough to prevent legal challenge. It planted a word in the public mind, misconduct, and let that word work without needing defense. I called my direct supervisor. Voicemail. I called the Director General's office. An assistant said they could not discuss the matter. I called a colleague I had helped personally on 3 occasions. The call rang out. No warning. No hearing. No opportunity to speak before the verdict was broadcast to the public. I put the phone down and stood at the kitchen window looking at the ordinary morning continuing outside. Life moving without any awareness of what had just been done to me. Just a statement. A word. And the silence of every person who should have called but had already decided not to. By the end of the second day, the isolation was complete. My office had been sealed. I discovered this not through official communication but by arriving and finding my access card deactivated, a printed notice on the door, and 2 administrative staff who looked at the floor when I appeared. My team of 6 people, some with whom I had worked for years, had been reassigned to other departments. One sent a brief message, "We were moved this morning. I'm sorry." That was the last message I received from anyone inside the building for a long time. The phone stopped ringing. This was more disorienting than the office closure, because silence has a specific texture when it comes from people who used to call regularly. It is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of a decision, the heavier, more deliberate quiet of people who are still there but have chosen not to reach toward you. People I considered genuine allies managed somehow never to be available. Unavailable by phone. Away from email. In meetings that ran every hour of every day. I had become untouchable. Everyone in the institution understood that being associated with me now carried a cost they were not prepared to pay. On the 4th day, I made myself sit down with the evidence document. Not to feel anything, I had done enough of that already, but to read it the way I had read hundreds of financial documents over 9 years. Carefully. Specifically. Looking not for the story it was telling but for where it did not hold together. The transactions listed were real. The account numbers corresponded to real treasury subaccounts. The project codes were accurate. Someone had used genuine institutional data as scaffolding. But the inconsistencies appeared as I read more carefully. Dates were wrong in 3 specific places, not dramatically, but wrong in the way only someone who understood treasury approval sequences would recognize. One approval appeared before its prerequisite authorization existed. One signature appeared on a document dated 4 days before that document had officially been created. And the formatting was too clean. Real internal documents carry marks of process, corrections, amendments, reference stamps from different departments at different times. These documents were pristine. Something deliberate had been done to them. I picked up a pen and started writing down every inconsistency I found. I found 11 by the end of that session. I drove to Chief Raymond Calloway's office on the 6th day. I did not call ahead. I did not want him to have the option of being unavailable. His assistant told me he was in a meeting. I said I would wait. I sat in reception for 37 minutes. Then Calloway appeared in the corridor, walking toward me with the calm pace of a man who had already decided how this conversation would go. We sat in his office with the door closed. No assistant. No recording. Just the 2 of us and 11 years of professional history between our chairs. I did not ask for sympathy or for him to make calls on my behalf. I asked one direct question. Did he believe the evidence against me was legitimate? He was quiet. He looked at his desk. He straightened a pen that was already straight. "Walker," he said, "you need to understand how political timing works. Not yes or no. Not I believe you or I don't. Not a gesture toward the possibility of my innocence. Just that sentence, calm, measured, and completely emptied of any commitment to the truth." I looked at him for a long moment. "I understand more than you think," I said. Then I left. And I did not go back. Those 2 words stayed with me through the entire drive home and through the quiet hours of that evening. Political timing. They told me everything. A man who believed in my innocence would not respond to my question with a statement about timing. A neutral man might have said, "Let the investigation run." He might have said almost anything pointing toward an open question. But timing implied the real calculus was not about truth. It implied my situation operated within a framework of convenience that Calloway understood and was participating in. He was not uncomfortable because he was uncertain about my guilt. He was uncomfortable because I had forced him to sit across from something he had already decided to let happen. I replayed the session in my mind. The speed of the reporters in the corridor. The precision of the documents. The way the chamber had turned instantly, as if the response had been coordinated in advance. Calloway's silence, deliberate, not passive. I was no longer convenient. That was the only explanation that made everything else fall into its proper position. If this was about convenience rather than truth, then the truth was still out there, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. That someone had to be me. I started working systematically from the second week of my suspension, using only my personal laptop and 9 years of treasury knowledge. I began with the flag transactions, not trying to disprove them, but tracing the full context around each one. Every government financial transaction exists within a chain, a request that originates somewhere, approvals that authorize it, a payment that executes it, and a recording process that documents it. If these transactions had been manipulated, they would have been inserted into existing chains with real origination points. I worked backward from each flagged amount, cross-referencing budget codes against public quarterly reports, matching project identifiers against the infrastructure registry I had personal copies of. What emerged was a pattern I had not expected in its specific shape. Every flagged transaction connected to a concentrated network. Same contractors appearing across multiple projects under different names. Same approval pathways. Same time windows between budget release and payment. The same structure repeated across different fiscal years and different ministries. Different names. Same hands. And my name inserted into the middle of it all. Recently, cleanly, like a label applied to someone else's box. Not organically present from the beginning, but placed there afterward. Deliberately. Someone had built a network and then attached my name to it as its face. The message arrived on a Thursday evening through an encrypted application I had not opened in months. The sender had no name, just an identifier number. The message was short. You are being used as a shield. The transactions you have been linked to are real. Your name is not the origin. It was added. I can show you the original file structure. This comes at risk to me. Decide if you want it. I sat with that message for almost an hour before responding. Everything about it was consistent with someone inside the Treasury system. Only a person with access to original document creation records would know the difference between a file created fraudulently and one created legitimately and then edited afterward. I typed one word, yes. The file arrived 40 minutes later, compressed and encrypted, with a password sent 2 minutes after. I spent 4 hours going through it that night, returning repeatedly to the same section, the document version history, the sequence of saves and modifications a file accumulates inside a system. My name appeared in the version history, but it appeared late, after the document had already existed for 11 days. Someone had opened a completed record and inserted my identity into it afterward. Someone had edited history. The version history unlocked everything. What it showed was not simply that my name had been added to an existing document. It showed the technical mechanism, the specific editing sequence, the user access log, the timestamps on each modification. The original document had been created 11 days before my name appeared anywhere in it. In its first form, it contained real transactions, real signatures, and real project codes, none connected to me. It was a legitimate internal document created for a legitimate purpose within normal Treasury operations. Then, on a specific date at a specific time, a user accessed it and made a series of changes. Project references in certain fields were modified. 3 approval signatures were altered. My name was inserted into the attribution fields, the sections identifying who had authorized the described transactions. The access record did not show my credentials. It showed a credential set I did not recognize, either a system administrator account or someone else's credentials used by a third party. This was not loose, opportunistic corruption. This was deliberate and technical. Someone had engineered a false paper trail from inside the system with sufficient access to do it cleanly, leaving a trace only detectable by someone who knew precisely where to look. I now knew precisely where to look. When I had worked through the full file, I allowed myself to see the complete picture for the first time. I was not a suspect who had been caught. I was a distraction, carefully selected, carefully positioned, constructed to absorb attention while real activity continued elsewhere. The logic was precise once you understood the design. You needed a fall person with a clean enough record to seem credible, public enough to generate real media attention, and politically isolated enough that nobody would rush to defend them. I was clean enough. My career had no existing vulnerabilities. The accusation seemed genuinely shocking because I was someone people recognized as principled. I was public enough. My advisory role gave me a profile. My name carried weight in the right circles. And I was isolated enough. No political bloc behind me, no institutional patron prepared to take personal risk. When Calloway said nothing, there was no one else positioned to speak. The setup had been built around those three characteristics. Someone had studied me and constructed the frame specifically to fit. I was not the origin. I was the destination. A clean name dropped at the end of a dirty trail to serve as the final stop. And it had been engineered that way from the beginning. I almost did not want it to be him. That was the honest truth. I had spent 3 weeks building toward this conclusion through evidence and logic, and somewhere in my thinking I had hoped the name at the center of the approval chain would be a stranger, someone I could expose without the weight of years attached. But the data was specific. Across 6 separate infrastructure projects spanning 3 fiscal years, one approval signature appeared at the exact stage where legitimate contracts had been diverted into the shell contractor network. The same signature, the same position, repeated every time. The senior authorization level, where approval carries the most institutional weight and receives the least routine scrutiny. I had the version history document from the insider. I had public procurement records assembled myself. I had contractor registration data traced through public registries. All 3 converged, independently, on one name. Chief Raymond Calloway. Multiple projects. Multiple years. Central positioning in every approval chain. Not peripheral association, deliberate, repeated, essential participation. My mentor was not silent because he was cautious or waiting for clarity. He was silent because speaking in my defense would have drawn attention to the investigation his involvement would require. He was not a witness to what had been done to me. He had ordered it. The anger came first. I want to be honest about that. I sat alone with the evidence spread across my desk and felt a cold, settled anger, not the reactive kind that passes in an hour, but the kind that comes when you understand something completely and cannot unknow it. 11 years. Mentorship. Trust given and apparently received. And underneath all of it, a person who had been calculating when and how to use me. I let myself feel that for one full evening. If you skip from betrayal directly to strategy, the strategy is built on unprocessed ground and it shows in how you act. The following morning, clarity came. With it came a purpose different from anything I had felt before. Not just determination or the professional commitment to accuracy that had driven my career. Something more personal and focused. I was done defending myself. Not because I had stopped believing in my innocence, I had more evidence of it now than ever. But because defending yourself against a false accusation and exposing the structure that created it are 2 completely different projects. The first was reactive. The second was mine to drive. I was done trying to prove what I had not done. I was going to show exactly what had been done, by whom, and how. Her name was Claire Dawson. She was 29, a junior systems analyst in the Treasury's Internal Audit Division. I had met her exactly twice before she reached out. Once at a briefing, once briefly in a corridor. She had no reason to help me, and she understood what helping me could cost her. She sent a message through the same encrypted application the insider had used. I've been watching what they did to you since the session. I work in the right part of the system to get you something they don't know exists. It would be enough. But if I'm caught, I lose everything I've built. I called her through the application's secure voice function. We talked for 40 minutes. I told her what I had. She described what she could access. I told her I would not use her as a source in any way that could expose her if I could prevent it. She was quiet for a moment. I know what they did to you was deliberate, she said. I've seen enough inside that system to know it. And I don't want to keep working somewhere like that without doing at least one thing. She agreed. From that moment, we worked together in careful silence until everything we needed was in hand. What Claire accessed were the system logs, the internal audit trail the Treasury's document management system created automatically every time a record was opened, edited, saved, or accessed by any user. These were not the same as the version history I had received from the insider. The version history showed what changes had been made. The system logs showed who had made them, when, from which terminal, using which credentials. They told a more complete story. The logs showed that on 4 separate occasions across a 3-month period before the session, records had been accessed and modified outside normal business hours. The modifications involved the specific fields in financial approval documents where authorization credentials and signatory information were stored. The credentials used belonged to a category of administrative access held by only a small number of people. Claire obtained the list of who held those credentials. Most critically, the logs revealed something the people who had edited the files apparently had not known. The unedited versions had been automatically backed up to a secondary archive server at the moment of their creation. Those backups existed, untouched, in a section of the system never subsequently reached. This was not opportunistic corruption. It was deliberate, systematic engineering of false records. The logs showed exactly who had done the engineering. By the time Claire and I had finished assembling everything, the picture was larger than I had initially understood. I had begun believing I was dealing with a targeted operation, something designed around me, involving a small number of people with a focused objective. What the full body of evidence revealed was different in scale. This was not a targeted operation that happened to be large. It was a functioning ecosystem. The shell contractor network connected upward, not just outward. It included officials at the ministry budget oversight level, people whose role was specifically to prevent this kind of activity, who had instead been incorporated into it. It included media contacts pre-briefed on my suspension, which explained why reporters had been in the corridor before the session properly concluded. And it included members of the internal audit function, which explained why the false documents survived initial review without triggering flags they should have. Each component protected the others. Any single element, investigated independently, would produce findings that stopped at its own boundary. The architecture was designed around that mutual protection. I had not been framed by opportunists. I had been framed by a sustained, protected network operating inside the government's financial infrastructure for years. One person sat at the center of all of it. Around the 4th week of my suspension, I noticed the surveillance. It was not obvious. Whoever was responsible had chosen discretion over intimidation. A gray saloon that appeared too regularly on the street outside my building. A pattern in my phone's behavior suggesting third-party monitoring. Twice, people appearing in public spaces where I had arranged to meet Claire. Watching at a distance, not approaching, just present. They were tracking my movements. They had not stopped watching simply because I was suspended and publicly disgraced. Either they suspected I was still active, or this was standard practice with someone who might have access to inconvenient information. It changed how I operated. I stopped using my regular phone for anything sensitive. Claire and I exchanged messages only through the encrypted application, only briefly, with no identifying specifics included. I began varying my routes and routines. I moved the documents off my personal devices onto an isolated drive stored at a separate location. More importantly, I stopped reacting to each day as it came. For 4 weeks I had been absorbing damage, managing what was being done to me, trying to stay upright. That posture was finished. I now knew exactly what I was facing, who was behind it, and what I held. I stopped reacting. I started planning. The trigger that changed the external conditions came in the 5th week of my suspension. 3 major infrastructure projects, announced with significant public fanfare in the previous year, representing substantial national expenditure, had stalled simultaneously. Site visits by independent journalists revealed that work had stopped weeks or months earlier. Contractors were unreachable. Workers had not been paid. Equipment had been removed. And the allocated funds, several billion across the 3 projects, could not be accounted for through normal financial reporting. Public outrage was immediate. Parliamentary opposition moved quickly. The national media pivoted sharply. Questions were being asked that standard government responses were not equipped to answer. Within that crisis, something shifted regarding my situation. My suspended investigation had been framed around financial misconduct in infrastructure procurement. The documents used against me were linked to infrastructure project funding. The crisis now unfolding involved the same domain, the same budget mechanisms, and several of the same project codes appearing in the evidence I had been quietly assembling for weeks. My case had not just become relevant again. It had become the most directly relevant investigation the government had available. They needed someone who understood what had happened. I was the only person who did. The call came through official channels. A formal message from the Parliamentary Secretariat requesting my attendance at a Crisis Response Committee consultation. My suspension had been placed in administrative hold, pending an immediate operational need. I read the list of people on that committee. 6 names. All familiar. 3 had been present at the session. 2 had issued public statements following my suspension that effectively endorsed the misconduct narrative. And 1 was Chief Raymond Calloway, listed as Senior Oversight Advisor. The same people who had constructed my public destruction were now requesting my return. No apology, no acknowledgement that anything had been done to me. Just a formal notice of operational need, written in the clean bureaucratic language that institutions use when they want something from a person they have mistreated. "We need your expertise," the note said. After everything that had been done to strip me of the professional standing that expertise was built on. I sat with the message for 1 full day. Then I wrote back that I would attend. Not to help them. Not to restore anything. But to finish what I had been building for 5 weeks. To walk into the room they were offering and use it in ways they had not imagined. I spent the 3 days between the invitation and the meeting finalizing everything. The decision to return was strategic. Without access to the rooms where the committee was operating, without being physically present where decisions were being made, my evidence existed in a vacuum. I could release it externally, through the press or legal channels. But I knew from 9 years inside government how external pressure is managed. Press stories get responded to. Legal processes move slowly. Noise can be diffused when the people inside the institution retain control over information flow. What I needed was a moment where the evidence entered the room directly, where the people most affected by its existence were present, visible, and unable to simply receive a briefing from a spokesperson. Where their reaction would be real and on record. The committee invitation had given me that moment. They believed I was coming to help manage a public relations emergency. They believed I was still the person I appeared to be before the session, someone without sufficient evidence, without allies, without a complete picture of what had happened. They were confident. And in that confidence, they had done the one thing that gave me the advantage. They had brought me back inside. The first committee session took place on a Wednesday morning in a second-floor conference room, wood-paneled, with a projection screen at one end and a long oval table surrounded by high-backed chairs. I arrived exactly on time. The 6 committee members were already seated. Calloway was positioned at the far end of the table, the position that conveys oversight without appearing to chair, exactly consistent with how I had watched him operate for 11 years. He looked up when I entered. Nothing in his expression changed. I took my assigned seat midway down the table. An assistant had placed a printed agenda and a briefing folder at my spot. I opened neither. The committee's opening presentation ran for 22 minutes. It described the 3 stalled projects, the public and political pressure the government was facing, and the financial irregularities, framed as systemic vulnerabilities, careful to distribute responsibility broadly and assign it to no one specifically. When the presentation concluded, the chair invited me to offer my initial assessment. I looked at each face around the table in turn. They were composed, controlled, and confident that they understood the situation completely. I set the committee's briefing folder aside without opening it. Then I said, "I'd like to share what I found." And I reached into my own bag. I had prepared the presentation carefully. Clear, sequenced, each piece of evidence connected to the next. I began with the recovery recommendations the committee had requested, presenting them completely because they were genuine and because it established credibility for what came next. After 15 minutes on the recovery framework, I said, "Before we discuss implementation, I need to walk through the source analysis. Because the vulnerabilities we are addressing are not actually what caused this situation." The chair nodded, assuming I was going deeper into procurement systems. I put the first evidence slide on the screen. The Shell contractor network. The same structural pattern traced across 14 projects over 4 years. The room shifted. People leaned forward, exchanged glances. The shift of people expecting one kind of analysis and receiving something categorically different. I did not hurry. I moved from the network structure to the financial flows, from the financial flows to the document modification records, from the modification records to the system logs. With each slide, the room grew quieter. Not the quiet of engagement, the quiet of people beginning to understand exactly where they were and what was coming. The room was completely still. Every person at that table was starting to feel that there was no remaining exit. I released the audit logs while connected to the room's projection screen. Claire had sent them to a secure server I accessed remotely, displaying them directly so there was nothing physical in the room that anyone could remove. The logs filled the screen, time-stamped, credential tagged, unedited. I walked through each entry slowly. Then I brought up the original, unedited document backup, the version existing before my name had been inserted. I placed it beside the modified version in a side-by-side display. The differences were visible without explanation. I let them sit on screen for 30 seconds without speaking. Then I brought up the approval chain, the complete authorization sequence across all 6 projects. Each project listed separately. At the senior authorization level in every single chain, the same credential set appeared with the same signature attribution. I did not say Calloway's name until the evidence was fully displayed and visible to every person in the room. Then I said it, clearly. He pushed back his chair and began to speak. Whatever sentence he had prepared broke apart before it arrived. The evidence was already on screen, already in the room. There was no dismissing it. The investigations moved faster than I expected and slower than I hoped, which is how these things always work. Within 48 hours of the session, the Parliamentary Oversight Authority had issued formal cooperation requests to 3 ministries. Within 5 days, the Anti-Corruption Division had opened independent proceedings. The media story shifted completely, not gradually, but sharply, the way stories shift when the evidence is too strong to reframe. On the 8th day, the first arrest was made, a procurement official whose credentials appeared in the system logs. 2 more followed, the nominee directors of 2 shell contractor entities traced through public registry records. Calloway resigned on the 10th day. His legal team issued a statement calibrated to neither admit nor deny. The Anti-Corruption Division announced simultaneously that he was under investigation. The investigation into my alleged misconduct was formally closed and my suspension lifted, without ceremony, through the same channel by which it had been imposed. I stood in front of reporters outside the parliamentary building 12 days after the session. I didn't survive this because I was powerful, I said. I survived because I was prepared to be patient. I paused. A setup only works if the truth doesn't fight back. I made sure the truth had everything it needed. Then I walked away.